Hello, my name is Corey Durbin, and you have found Running Eyes. In this podcast, we will take a deep dive into the relationships, strategies, and global mission of Alliance for Shared Health to change healthcare and change lives. Sometimes we will travel on parallel paths with others who have dared to journey through the challenges of life in pursuit of a purpose bigger than self. As we travel these roads together, I believe you will find encouragement from either their connection to ASH or their resolve for the commitment and strength it takes to vigilantly pursue their passions. Welcome to Running Eyes. I am joined today by my good friend Kristen Ernst. Kristen is a licensed professional counselor for over 8 years. She's the owner of the Center for Hope and Healing. She regularly speaks about mental health and self-care, and she writes multiple blogs, typically on topics like hospice, funeral service, end-of-life care, those kind of things. And there is so much going on, especially pre and post pandemic, regarding various mental health issues that it seemed appropriate. I've taken a bit of a hiatus from our regular podcast. It is good to be back live and in studio with my good friend Kristen Ernst. Kristen, how are you?
I am doing well. I'm so excited that you're here and that we get to do this together and our worlds collide once again. So I love that.
Thanks for taking the time. You don't have a schedule that is typically very free these days.
No, I purchased the Center for Hope and Healing about a year ago in the pandemic. I was working as a director of grief services for Bowie Funeral Homes, which is a local funeral home here. And I was part of their communication and community relations, and then doing a lot of counseling there as well for tragic loss and sudden loss, and working with hospice companies, of course. And then during the pandemic, they came in and said, we have to let you go.
Wow.
And then they said, but would you like to buy our Center for Hope and Healing? And I said, yes. I jumped up at that opportunity. So it's a real honor to not only be here, but be here a year after owning a business in the pandemic. I never thought that would happen. So I'm really excited.
So they said, we have to let you go or you can buy the business.
Yeah.
And well, which is better, actually, having all the headaches or just some of the headaches?
Right. It's been the best of both worlds because I'm a contracted employer for them. I still do a lot of things for the funeral home, events and speaking for them on their behalf, but then own the center. So it's been great.
And the funeral home is
Bowie Funeral
Bowie.
Homes. Yeah.
I was working under that assumption, and
yeah.
You have a connection to Bowie.
I do, full circle. So when I, in 2004, my son died he needed a double lung transplant. And my good friends, Corey and Summer, were there during all of that. He was not able to get the double lung transplant in time, and we had to take him off of ECMO, which is a lung and heart bypass machine. So that was a very, very difficult time in our lives. And we used Bowie Funeral Homes when he died and had his service there. So when I was hired there, it was like, I just felt like it was a full circle, that like God had used that pain and difficult time to help others. Because as you know, like I went, once Aiden died, I was insatiable as far as my grief goes. I was reading every book and trying to get my hands on going to counselors and trying to get my hands on everything to do grief right, trying to do it the right way. And what I found in my journey is there's no real right way to do it, and which also caused me to go back and get my master's in counseling and try and help others, kind of companion them through it versus treating them and sending them on their way. It's a very different philosophy in grief counseling versus different sects of counseling.
Well, so often I think the place we get to in our lives is birthed out of our own hurt, or sometimes
Very
our own,
so.
even our own, I don't know, it can be successes, but sometimes the successes come from overcoming hurt.
Yeah.
I would define where you are as success. I don't know if that's how you would look at it.
Thank you.
Those days are days, it's interesting because I think we tend to, there are things we compartmentalize. It's probably easier for us, I'm talking about my wife and I, to compartmentalize that because it isn't our experience. And when you remind me of the date and the time and talk about ECMO machines and like all of my, I go back there very quickly.
Yeah.
So there's a place in my mind where that's very real. And so I've told you this before, and I know my wife has. We so admire your courage, and you know you've been doing what you've been doing for 8 years. And 2004 was the 4 days of life that your son Aiden had.
Yeah.
And so it took a while to get to the point where you are today, huh? With
Very much so.
where you are in your career.
Yeah.
And is there what do you attribute to getting to where you are now, and the services that you provide and the career you have?
Well, we went to background story is that when things weren't going well in my marriage, which child loss, there's an 80% divorce rate. So things weren't going well in the marriage, and we went to several counselors, whether they were licensed professional counselors that were specifically Christian, or we went to pastors. And my husband had started cheating a lot through the marriage, and then blaming it on the grief. And so we went to several pastors and several people that just said, you know, just try and forgive and walk through this together. And so I did that for a certain amount of years. And then I went to another counselor that my ex-husband now had stormed out of the office, was really angry. And she looked at me and she said, "Do you think he's going to keep on doing this?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "Do you think he'll take care of you when you're old?" And I thought to myself, he hasn't taken care of me at all.
Wow.
And so, and this isn't to bash him at all. This was just like, oh my gosh, like this was a wake-up call to, I think that I had other underlying mental health issues prior, and layered with the Christianity, it was almost like this perfect storm of like, I was just seeking God, and I really believe that God put this counselor on my path to be like, this is something you have to work on. This is your own self-worth that you have to improve. And so that caused me to leave and then go back to school, which that whole, me going back to school was an amazing testimony in which I didn't know where I was going to get the money from. I didn't know how I was going to do that. And my dad is a financial planner, and he had done well for this gentleman, and he said, "Hey, you know, you've done so well for me. If there's anything that I can do for you, you let me know." And how many times do people say that to us, and we don't ever really ask? We were like, "Oh yeah, sure. Oh, that's great." Yeah.
Do they really mean it?
Right,
you know?
Right. And so my dad knew what I was going through and said, "Actually, my daughter, he was a big wig at Lindenwood, to make the story short, and he said, "I'm retiring. I'm moving to Arizona, and why don't you have your daughter come in and talk to me?" So I went in and talked to him, and he said, "You know, I have had people help me in my life and my journey, and now I'm moving and moving to Arizona, and I just feel like I'm supposed to help you, and I'm going to pay for your master's program." And so
that had to hit you
hard. I was like bawling my eyes out. There were like 8 people there because he was leaving. So he was like, so-and-so is going to take care of you and get you admitted, and so-and-so is going to do this for you. He had like stipulations of like, you know, you have to go straight through, and you have to have like basically a 3.5 GPA and all those kinds of things, which I was fine with, of course. And I walked out of there crying, just feeling like, because I had felt so depleted and so down, and how was I going to do this? And then that was like that.
So, yeah.
This was like that, you know, that universe saying, "Okay, no, you've got this, and people kind of rallying behind me. So I, you know, went right into my program. And I just knew that I was going to help people, not only with, my heart was to teach people about grief and about trauma, and work on self-esteem and self-worth, all the things that I have had to work on, because I have continued that journey. Like I would never go to a counselor that hasn't gone to a counselor. Like that's really important. So I continue to kind of improve in my own journey and work on things that I know I need to work on, and with that counselor that I really believe saved my life in many, many ways. So that's where we are today. I mean, I work with a lot of clients that are dealing with eating disorders, grief and trauma, sudden loss, survivors of suicide. People are always like, gosh, isn't that depressing? Isn't that really depressing? And I'm like, it's meaningful work. It's really meaningful work. It's hard, but I love it.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
We are made more and more aware of it in what we do with our health share program and the members that our customer care team works with every day. And second of all, and maybe first, is I'm really sorry you had to go through that post your son's death. And we're friends, so we've had this conversation before, but I want to just acknowledge that no one should have to go through that.
Thank you.
And it's out of these challenges that what makes it tends to make us, and sometimes the making is a really painful thing to go through, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. But it's a part of that, like, like burning out the bad stuff. You know, I think that's really important part of the journey is for us to go through that stuff, and then I know that people come to me because they know I've had child loss. You know, I'm able to understand that in a way that other counselors can't. I've had somebody, I don't want to get into like shop talk, but I had somebody come to me and say, I've been grieving the loss of my son who suicided, and my last counselor was trying to use cognitive behavioral therapy on me, meaning get rid of the negative thoughts by replacing them with positive ones. And that doesn't work in grief. Like, that's like just kind of like bulldozing your emotions, and that's not a good thing. So,
you know, the advice one decides to listen to is critical too. And you were mentioning going through the counseling with your ex-husband and the sort of advice of Christian counselors of forgive and go through this with each other. And, you know, there's part of that, right? And it just got me thinking, I've said this before in what we do. Yeah, we run a health share ministry, and yes, I'm not afraid to say that I'm Christian. And sometimes working with Christians is the worst thing that I experience. And when people lead with that, that's who they are. I want to know by what I see you do, not by what you tell me. Yeah. And you know, you can, I don't know if this was your situation, but you can get into these counseling sessions that turn into church speak instead of, let's talk about this in terms of the real world. You know where I'm going with that?
Oh, exactly. I say to a lot of people that I really love Jesus. I don't like his friends very much. And I think that that's pretty congruent with how I feel about, I am really careful. We are almost in a culture of church, I think sometimes when we've been in church and grown up in the church, and I try and allow people in counseling in my sessions to just be real. You know, I wasn't really allowed to say that I was angry. At one point I said in a session one time, I'm really angry at my husband for cheating on me again. I'm really angry. And the counselor said, it's fine to be angry as long as you don't sin in your anger. And she recited the verse about David not, lying on his bed and not being in anger.
Like, what does that mean?
Okay, now what? What do I do with that? What do I do with that anger? Where do I go with it? Where do I place it? I think that those are the things that we need to really be discussing in mental health, is that, and that the church needs to be addressing in mental health, honestly, is that we can trust God and we can do all the things and we can and go that route, but I am finding more and more that people are needing tangible skills.
Yeah.
To be able to apply to their lives to feel better.
Right. And trusting God, I think there's a misconception, at least in my mind, that trusting God means you just sort of roll over and let yourself get bulldozed. Right. And that probably is more true, unfortunately, of a thought process for women than men. It can happen on both sides.
Yeah,
and I'm
not,
I've
seen it both.
Unconscious or oblivious to that fact. And I just say, that doesn't mean I just willy-nilly accept all of this crap that is happening to me. And that mentality has to change, I think. Right. And the stigma that divorce is some unpardonable sin. I'm not here advocating divorce, but there are times when it's not safe to stay in the situation that you're in.
Right. And it wasn't safe at all. So, I think that the message that I try and convey, not only in my life but in my practice, is that God is love, and love means accepting people as they are, as they come to you, and not trying to fix them, but just validate where they are in their experience.
Right.
And then once that happens, people, especially in grief, once somebody says, I had a grief group just the other day that someone said, I don't want to live. I don't want to. And now this wasn't somebody that was suicidal, but they just, their person died, and they feel like their right arm was severed, and they don't know how to, they don't know how to move on in life, or move through in life. We never say move on, by the way.
Yeah.
But, he was saying, I just don't want to live. And once he said that in the group, everyone in the group was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that, because I feel that way too. And it validated everything that everyone was feeling in the room, just no one felt like they could say.
Saying it doesn't mean
Right.
you're doing it.
Yeah.
And we had talked to Dr. Todd Frisch, Todd.
Yes.
And one of the things, he conveyed a story or relayed a story of a woman that he was helping through facial diagnosis, and she had some skin issues, eczema issues, and that kind of thing. And he said, well, that's not the issue. The issue is some underlying stuff you have going on with X, Y, and Z in your life, and people can go back and listen. I wouldn't say the story correctly anyway. The point is, once she verbalized it, she said, what do I do about it?
Yeah.
And his answer was, you just did. So this whole, you said it, and instead of internalizing it, and so that hits home for me when
Oh yeah.
you say that.
Research shows that we're learning so much more about the brain, but there's a direct correlation, between trauma and autoimmune diseases, and how people have not been able to voice their trauma, and this correlates into things staying in the body and then making us sick. And so that's why mental health is such a huge part of our overall health. Because it does play into everything else.
Right.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, so you've gone through this. I love having our guests get known a little bit. I think all of this becomes more real when there's a realization that we all have a story, and maybe we'll bounce back and forth a little bit between your story and some of the things that you're doing now. And I'd like to shift gears a little bit to some of the things that are going on, you feel like here, maybe pre and post pandemic, but what's going on with the clients that you're seeing, not necessarily specific issues, although that may be the case, but what I think is probably an uptick in mental health issues. And is that, can you speak to that just a little bit?
So part of that we haven't mentioned, part of my background is in suicide intervention and prevention. And I worked at a life crisis services, which is a national hotline, actually, that's in St. Louis, which is so great to have that resource here. And so that experience was rich. First of all, it taught me how to safety plan with people and recognize that just because someone is suicidal doesn't mean that they need to be hospitalized right away. Some people are chronically suicidal every day. And so how do we find, how do we treat these people? How do we help them? So what I have seen in the pandemic, though, is that this isolation has raised the feelings of hopelessness, suicidal ideation. We're just seeing a huge increase for people that were grieving. We saw this a lot. People that lost loved ones, not even necessarily to COVID, but to other things, were not able to have funerals, not able to, celebrate their loved one and memorialize their loved one. And so that whole process is put on hold. For people that say that time heals all wounds, I could say a cuss word right now. That's not true. So time does not heal all wounds. I had a woman come into my office who had a loss 35 years ago, a tragic loss, but then in that she had to raise her boys alone. They were young boys, and she had to just move forward. In crisis, we kind of have this tunnel vision, and that's what she had to do to get through. And then she was coming into my office 35 years later because she had remarried just recently, and her husband had cancer. And she said, it's bringing up all of the old stuff.
Wow.
So we hold on to that. We carry it with us always. And what I have found in the pandemic is that their grief is on pause. It's been on hold because we have to, in order to move through our grief, we have to have it witnessed by other people. That's why I think that I did well, honestly, is because I had friends like you and Summer and other people that were listening to me and saying, and I could sit with them and say, I just can't believe this happened. And you guys just sat with us. Mm-hmm. It has to be witnessed, and for people to be isolated in their grief and not be able to go and have lunch with a friend or not be able to go to a grief group. That's why I started online grief groups, is because I felt like, gosh, we have to do something. We can't meet in person. That's
and
fine.
How do your online grief groups work?
So they're a Zoom platform, and people register for them and then come. And a lot of times, I always have people. I do an education element to it, but then I always have people say their name, their loved one's name, because as we say our loved one's name, we want to talk about them. We not only want to talk about them, we want to hear their name, because as we get through our grief, people stop talking. They don't want to upset you. They don't want to do anything to make you feel any kind of a negative emotion. So I always have them say their name, their loved one's name, and how long it's been since they died. And that kind of just gives everyone, there is no timeline to grief, but people are able to say, oh, your loved one died 3 months ago. Are you really angry right now? Because I'm really angry. And then there's this connection, because grief is so isolating anyway. So if you take grief and that isolation and then put it on top of the pandemic, like even as things are starting to open up again, people are so anxious. I don't know if you've noticed that. People are so anxious to even get out and do stuff.
What percentage of the people that, rough guess, do you think internalize everything? That they're so used to, they don't think that they should take up space, or maybe it's where they were the third child, or they're the whatever, and kind of the baby in the corner. How common is that?
I think that the unfortunate part is I don't get to see that many of those people, because they're not coming to counseling, right? They're not coming to grief groups. Those are the people that are pretty not emotionally, for lack of better words, not very emotionally intelligent. People that are needing to talk about their grief will, how many times do you say to people, like, just as you're walking through, we have this tendency, and it happens in counseling too, where just this morning I had an appointment, and I said, how are you doing? She goes, okay. And then she gets and sits in the chair, and she goes, I'm terrible. Like, I'm struggling. And I just think that we are in that tendency to just, even whether it be to people on the street or in the church or even our friends, we're not really authentic.
Right.
We're afraid to be authentic.
Have you ever heard Matthew West's song, Truth Be Told?
No.
I'll have to listen to it, because it makes me think of that.
Yeah.
And the song is essentially, him saying, truth be told, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
And you want me to say I'm fine, nothing's wrong.
Yeah.
And I've poorly paraphrased the words, but
I'll have to listen to it. It's
really good, because it's this whole, let's be real with each other now. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a time and a place, I guess, and we've many of us have gotten so comfortable being uncomfortable that it's creating many of the problems probably that are coming, mental health issues.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's a great book out there by Megan Devine. She has a great social media presence, and but her book is called "It's Okay to Not Be Okay." And I love that title, because that allows us to just be authentic and real. Now, there's another side of that, that probably, I think it was 6 weeks after Aiden died. It was the first time I'd ever been able to drive after my C-section. And so I got into the car. I was hell-bent on going somewhere. And I went to the grocery store with my daughter, Zoe, who was 3 at the time. And she's in the cart, and she has these adorable little red curls. And we're going through the grocery store, and I get to check out, and the checkout person says to me, she's so cute. She needs a little brother or sister.
Mm.
And I, like, in that moment, like, just bawled. I was like, she has a brother that died. And I've never seen someone bag groceries so fast in all my life. Like, she like, won the Olympics that day for bagging groceries because she was, and then she probably learned a lesson, right? Like, she learned a lesson to probably not say something like that. So part of my education in grief is to not only, allow people to be who they need to be, but also as supporters and caregivers, what do we say to people that are grieving? What do we not say to people that are grieving? I think that's a really important part of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's...
And Corey, you never said any of those things, by the way.
Well, I probably have, and I may still. Thankfully, we have somebody that
you
can
and Summer
edit.
are really good at not saying those things.
I still say some crazy things on these podcasts, and thankfully we can edit a lot of that stuff out. I'm wondering, too, a little bit about with what's gone on in the pandemic and the masks thing, and whether you're pro-mask, anti-mask, that's not the issue to me as much as the contact, the face-to-face contact. I travel, I still am in airplanes, and nobody looks at each other anymore.
No.
And
I mean, the phones already did that anyway, right? But that gets even worse. No, way worse.
I find it awful because, and now with the mask, and I mean, I'm not necessarily a fan, and I'm okay if somebody feels like they need to wear a mask. I think everybody should get to choose. But one of my real problems is I like to connect with people. I want to smile at you as we're walking past each other. And when we went to Ethiopia with our board, with the Board of Ash, just looking at the kids on the street, or not just the kids, the adults too, and smiling at them, their faces lit up because they felt seen. And I think that's a big problem right now. Yeah. Because people just they don't feel like they even exist to some degree.
Yeah, I think you're really right on. I had to learn when I was working in funeral service during the pandemic, I had to learn how to communicate with my eyes as much as possible and convey that compassion through my eyes and really be aware of it and cognizant of it. I think that we can still do that. I think that there are things that we might have learned from the pandemic that it also takes us a little bit of eye contact. Now with teenagers, don't make too much eye contact. That freaks them out. I gotta say that. But I think that sometimes we need that contact. We need somebody to hold our hand. We need somebody to just be there in the trenches with us.
Yeah, that makes sense. We spent some time reading a book called Fierce Conversations years back in another life, and written by Susan Scott. And one of the things that always sticks with me is she says in the book, the conversation isn't about the relationship, it is the relationship. And so that's sitting and actually connecting and not being distracted by phone or anything else. Like, be present in that moment. And it feels like that could change the dynamic for a lot of people that are struggling, because it seems to be a bit of a lost art.
Yeah. We, I think that's partly why Zoom, we had the option during the pandemic to either come in person and wear a mask, or do a session over Zoom. And so many people chose Zoom because, one, it was really convenient, and two, that you could see someone's whole face. And there was that, and not to mention when somebody is crying, which in a lot of my sessions people are crying, and then that mask starts to stick to people's faces and it just becomes like a giant snot rag. It's not attractive. People know that. And so they're like, yeah, next time I'm going to do Zoom.
That makes sense. And so, I think there's a lot of social issues that are going on. I don't think it's obvious. Your clientele, what kind of things that are you seeing? Is there a prevalence toward some of the transgender issues? Are there suicidal ideation? I mean, what does it run the gamut of for you?
So I would say that I'm in St. Charles County, which is in Missouri and is a predominantly white place. And I have 50% of my practice is minorities. And then also, we do have a lot of the LGBTQ plus community in our practice. And I'm really happy about that. Really proud to offer, companionship to those issues.
What is going on in the LGBTQ plus arena that you think is leading to so many people coming in?
I would say that I don't have the current statistics, but that community has an incredibly high suicide rate, and transgender especially has a large suicide rate. So really, what we don't recognize is that just by addressing people by their preferred pronouns is a way to prevent suicide. So,
wow.
Like when people are asking me, how can I help people? Just meeting people where they are is where we can do that, and not having any judgment. And so that, I would say, that's the biggest issue, is hopelessness. Self-harm is a very large component.
And is the hopelessness coming from feeling like not being accepted, or is it afraid to say who you are, or
gosh, it's so many things. I mean, it's so many things, but I think even in their own bodies, there's what they call is body dysmorphia.
Yeah.
And not wanting, like looking at their bodies and hating it, no matter what other people see. And so that's a real, so even if they have real acceptance and their support systems, a lot of times that's hard to, I think that's hard is, in the heterosexual with men and women, like that we have a hard time accepting our bodies.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of, and that's why I work with so many people that are dealing with eating disorders as well. I think that we have to come to this radical self-acceptance.
So going back to the social issues and some of the maybe the mental health issues in the LGBTQ plus arena, and before we go talk about some of the eating disorder issues, you hit on this idea of body dysmorphia, and I know there's an external social acceptance issue.
Yes.
And I think I'm hearing you say there's an internal acceptance issue too.
Yeah.
Am I understanding you right when you talk about that?
Yeah. When we talk about, and when you're talking about that internal process, I think that so many people in that community feel like, in the transgender community especially, feel like their body has betrayed them. And so that's really important to address. And just the way we were talking about the grief part, so much of this is just getting this out in the open and working through those and normalizing it and debunking it and saying, that's really common, and that's okay, and so let's work on some ways to have these positive affirmations about yourself that you love and work on those. And so,
does the internal acceptance lead to an easier ability to accept whatever's going on externally? And let me be careful, because I'm not trying to say that mental health issues are self-inflicted. I really am just in your practice, because there's external issues that have to be addressed and fixed too. But is that a big part of the healing and almost creating a little bit of, I'll say, bulletproofness or insulation?
Yeah, I don't think that anybody, I mean, I don't think that you've had an easy journey. I don't think that I've had an easy journey. I don't think that life is easy.
Well, we've all got a story.
We've all got stuff. And so to say that something makes it easier, I don't know if that's really the right verbiage. And I don't, but I do think that we can just meet people where they are and sit with them and help them feel validated. And that in almost every case, whether it be grief or suicide or any kind of issue, when you sit with somebody in that trench and you hold their hand, and now let me be clear, I'm not like physically holding their hand, but when you hold their hand emotionally and say, I'm here, and you can say whatever you want in here, and it's going to be okay, then that lets people be okay with themselves in a way, So I do think that and then people feel empowered. I for my own story, I can say that, when I realized that I needed to leave my marriage and I was a shell of a person, I had to work on building myself up and having this radical self-acceptance about where I was and how my life wasn't going to look the way I wanted it to look, and my family wasn't going to look the way I wanted it to look, but it empowered me too.
I wonder sometimes if we get caught up in the idea of we think we have an idea of how we think things should go.
Yeah.
And when they're not going that way, first of all, we sometimes feel some shame. We put some personal shame
Sure.
on ourselves. And then we probably have some put on us by the outside world at times.
Sure.
And Paul says it. He said, if our hope is in this life alone, we're the most pitiable of men. Should have added men and women. Mm-hmm. There's a, how do we find the fine line between holding on to, being able to hold on to and hold to beliefs and know this and that can be true. In other words, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'm like,
there's space for both
cry
things.
because I think that that's the truth for everything. Like, I think that, no different than when we were, you and Summer and myself, and we were all praying for Aiden to be healed, right? Mm-hmm. And we were all praying that he would live and be a great man. And so it didn't go the way we thought it was going to go. And that was a tragic loss. And I can make meaning of my journey and make meaning of what's happened. I still would like for him to be here. I did have a dream for like a year after Aiden died. I don't think I've ever told you this, but I had a dream consistently for a year that I literally raised Aiden from the dead, went and dug him up and raised him from the dead. And every time I did, he would say, "Mom, why'd you do that? Like, I loved it where I was. Like, I'm good." And I was raising him the dead for me. And so, I think the hard part about being in the church community and being in any community for that matter is that we try and make meaning of other people's journeys. Mm-hmm. And we try and make meaning too soon for them. And so I think I've made meaning of mine, and I think you've made meaning of yours, but I sure as heck wouldn't try and put meaning on yours. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, totally.
Yeah.
And I'm in town this week. My dad's in hospice, and he was like your son, whose name was appropriate. Aiden means the fighter, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
My dad's always been a fighter, and he's not quite ready to give up. But his body was really depleted from the chemo. It didn't handle it well. He's thankfully not in pain. And I'm in town this week, and I get to be in our offices, which I enjoy, and kind of bounce back and forth from that. And people ask me, "Hey, how are you doing?" And this is back to your dream of, I'm actually feel like I'm in a good place because I believe my dad knows where he's going, and I believe he's going to be glad when he gets there. And I say, if we knew where we were going, we'd want out of here now, because there's a lot of stuff that goes on here that just isn't, frankly, that much fun.
Yeah, to put it lightly.
And you still see the other side. I mean, I'm watching my dad's body decay, and that's no fun.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be all bad. And I'm not trying to project the way I look at it, that's how everybody else should look at it.
Yeah.
And there's a truth to the fact that you know where Aiden is.
Yeah.
And you believe it, and your dream in many ways confirmed that, like, hey, Mom, it's okay. Let me go. I'm good.
Yeah.
And
I wasn't ready.
It doesn't mean you move on, though, as you said.
Oh yeah, it's different. And I do think that I worked in hospice for many years, and hospice is all about finding meaning. It's all about reconnecting, and so I'm sad that your dad is having that experience, but I'm also glad that your family is able to have that rich time.
For sure. And
yeah.
I mean, we got to go to the beach at Christmas time together, and he was, you could tell that he was fading. And
you guys all look so good in those pictures, though.
That's nice. But
yeah.
There were once I went up to the condo that they were staying in, my mom and dad, and one of my sisters was staying in a condo together, and my sister and her husband and son were staying in another condo. And so I went over there, brought some groceries, and I was like, oh man, I know he's in there by himself because everybody else was gone. I didn't want him to have to get up, didn't have a key. I'm like, that was dumb. I should. But long story short, I go in and I start putting these groceries away, and I turn around and he's falling. And it's like happening in slow motion. And he's falling backwards. I'm like, oh. And he fell sort of against the wall. And I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? He's like, I thought there was a chair behind me. And it was such an awareness to me of how the mental, there's a lot, not as much clarity, Yeah. But even in that, the time was sweet. When we got done, he's like, that was the best trip I've ever been on in my life. And it's like, wow, there's something amazing happens when we are forced to slow down and just engage and have real conversation. And he's been given a gift in many ways because he can see that we're not made very aware sometimes that our time is close.
Yeah.
And so we've been given a gift in that too.
Yeah. So as difficult as it is,
And the people are amazing, and they've been amazing. And I was hearing a story about a friend who the hospice folks brought in somebody to play the cello as his mom was passing, and so she got to hear the cello being played the last couple hours of her life. And those things are great for that person who's dying, but they are also really meaningful for us. So this idea of eating disorders, it seems to be prevalent right now. And I don't know if this is fair, but if it's attributable to some of the lack of control that we have going on in the world around us. But you want to talk just a little bit about what you're seeing there?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of times eating disorders have a comorbidity of obsessive compulsive disorder. So like that's something to just kind of compartmentalize for a minute. So when things are out of control, things are, there's a big trauma component to eating disorders usually, that there's one thing that you can control, and it's your eating habits. And it's not necessarily, there is a lot of body dysmorphia in the eating disorder community. I would say that it's not all body dysmorphia, though. A lot of it is about controlling, or it starts off as control and then morphs into something else. It's one of the deadliest mental health disorders that we have in the United States.
The stats I've heard is that about 10% actually end in death.
Yeah, it's a
which is staggering, really.
And it's very difficult to treat, and it's ongoing, usually life ongoing, which is difficult to hear because my family's been touched by that, by eating disorders. So I think that we've noticed, I think this was in a documentary recently, but in 2006 with introduction of social media, they were finding that 10 to 11-year-old girls were self-harming because they didn't like their bodies. They are comparing, when we were kids, I know we're so old, but when we were kids, like we compared ourselves to the prettiest girl in school. Well, now they compare themselves to the prettiest girl in the world.
Which isn't real. Which doesn't even look like she really looks.
It's not even real. It's not even real. It's been airbrush and lighting crews and makeup and the whole bit. I mean, if we carried those around with us, we look fantastic all the time.
Well, you don't need that. I probably would, but
the point is that like we're fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, and of course there's a documentary, The Social Dilemma, and I was going to say it is such a social dilemma. Yeah. And as a parent, when your kids get to a certain age, you realize you're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't, which is provide them with phones that they have social media access, because it is the way our kids connect.
Right.
And are you doing them more harm than good? Well, I might say more harm than good. But it's still really a challenging fine line to walk.
It is, and I also think that a lot of times our kids pick up things that from their parents that we don't even realize that what we're doing. I was always as a mother of girls, I was always very careful about not shaming my body in front of them or shaming their bodies, but I also had an inner dialogue that was pretty easy to read. I mean, I was, even in my, before my divorce, I don't want to talk about anything that's going to be really triggering to other people that are listening to this, but I was counting, was counting calories and stepping on the scale every day. And because I honestly have obsessive compulsive disorder tendencies, like I was stuck, very much stuck in all of those behaviors. And my children witnessed that. So I think it's really important for us to, like, that's where that radical self-acceptance comes in. And I'm very, I try and love all the parts of my body that I don't love. There's also this other trend now that doesn't seem very authentic to be like, I love my stretch marks and I love this part about me. And so now they're coming out with more of a body neutrality of like, I may not love my legs, but they get me from A to B and they do great things for me. And that and if we can model that behavior as parents and be exercising for stress management and for our hearts and our bodies versus changing our bodies, that's going to be a step up for our children.
Don't you think it comes back a little bit to this idea that this and that can be true? And you can not like something about yourself and still like who you are and still like overall your body and those kind of things. So it doesn't make everything else not true.
That's the whole thing about cognitive behavioral therapy, is that all or nothing thinking doesn't really get us anywhere. And trying to kind of debunk that or challenge those cognitive distortions of, I don't like this part of my body, so I don't like any of it. That's not really fair to ourselves.
What would you say to parents that, as you talked about, it's easy for us to fall into, and my wife and I have done it, like, hey, we're getting older, our metabolism's changing, we need to maybe be careful about what we eat, or, be more in moderation at certain times or whatever. And it might be easy for somebody hearing this to think, well, I've been doing that. Oh my gosh, I did this to my child. What would you say to a parent like that?
So I think it's important to always look at any mental health in this vein of when when a child gets cancer, everyone rallies around that child, and I'm as they should, rallies around that child, and no one blames the parents for that child getting cancer. But any mental health disorder, we immediately blame parents. We immediately look at them and say, well, how did you mess this up? And that's not necessarily fair. I think that so many times this is a perfect storm of events that happens. And, you have attachment disorders along with trauma, along with maybe some eating habits that weren't healthy. And then it becomes a slippery slope. So I think the first part is to, one, take responsibility, but not take all of the responsibility. To take onus on your own, like your own habits, your own kind of, I think that's why it's important. I mean, I think every parent should be in therapy. I think every counselor should be in therapy. I don't think people wait until something tragically happens and they're like, oh, I need to get into therapy. And then what happens is we work on something that the tragic part of whatever they came in for, that presenting action, but then we start unpacking all this other stuff. And so I think that we have to have, again, radical self-acceptance, but then also take responsibility and try and model those behaviors. I think that it's those healthy behaviors. I mean, yes, our metabolism slow down. I think that we have an issue with not wanting to look old, though. That's the thing. Like I remember looking at my grandmother, and she was beautiful, and she was beautiful, and she She always put her face on. She always said that. I put my face on. But like, she didn't get a lot of, cosmetic surgery. She didn't, she was chubby and loving and just more to love. So I don't think that the younger generations necessarily, they're going into that older age kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
Which is a whole nother slew of social issues.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing you say relative to the parents is, look, that you can take responsibility. Don't take all the blame. Mm-hmm. It's my wife and I talk about this, and I probably say this to her more, as I say, listen, we could be perfect parents. It mm-hmm. doesn't mean perfect kids.
Right.
And we're not going to be perfect parents. We're going to do it wrong. Yeah. And even, we're not, no person is perfect. So we're all on a journey. We're all on a different journey. And we want to insulate our children from hurt and despair and negative feelings and relationships. And that's not real life.
Right.
And who we are is developed from the challenges as much as probably more so than from the walking on the path without mm-hmm. getting bumped and bruised.
Yeah. I think that we're trying to build resiliency in our children. That's really the goal, is to build resiliency. And this new word that's big and fancy, and you can impress your friends at dinner parties, is neuroplasticity. Is like making sure that we are able to adapt to change. And there's all kinds of things you can do to increase your neuroplasticity. It's something as simple as like doing a puzzle, or trying something new, trying a new sport, trying a new exercise routine, whatever that is. But like, to me, that's one of my goals as a parent for my children, is to increase their resilience and increase their neuroplasticity. And then by doing so, then we're not going to see mental health go away. Like, that's like, but part of this is just the awareness and talking about it. And like, this is coming to the forefront where we can finally talk about it.
Let's talk about access.
Yeah.
The one thing that I hear, and from friends with experiences, or some of the things that hit close to home for us, are it's not easy to find somebody to talk to. Maybe A is somebody qualified to talk to, and then B, when you find that qualified person, to be able to get in and talk to them. Yeah. Is it a function of lack of professionals? It is more of a function of so many people with challenges, or probably some of both. But
I think when you're talking about access, it's two things. It's lack of qualified professionals. There's a lot of people. I joke around. I have a lot of interns that come through the Center for Hope and Healing, and I have a real heart to help people through that, because the one thing that they don't teach you, and I think there's two things that they're missing in programs, and one is self-care. Like, that should be like taught all through the entire program of your master's program and licensure and all those things. But the other thing is entrepreneurship. And people that are counselors usually are terrible business people. Terrible. And thankfully I have a good business coach and a good, like, I have when I know I can't do something, I get people in place that can help me. And so that has helped me tremendously. But I do think that because of that, you see a lot of counselors that get out of the field because they're burnt out and they don't know how to, like, running a business is too much, and or they work for an agency that overbooks them and takes advantage of them. So they go and, no offense, sell insurance, and so they because it's too much.
Yeah, so it's okay.
Yeah, anybody that's selling insurance, it's just a less stressful job. So and the other part too is that something that if I go on vacation, I never tell people that I'm a counselor. Because you go to sit by the pool and you say you're a counselor, and before you know it, you have someone telling your life story. So I always, I heard that in a seminar one time. They said, always tell people you sell insurance, which I thought was good. People don't want that, so they just move on. But so I think it's lack of providers is a huge part. Like, I, for instance, right now have a 5-month waiting list. And that's the way everybody is. I went to call and refer, and they had it on their voicemail that said, we have a 4-month waiting list. So that's That's definitely an issue. The other part, I think, is coverage. Like insurance is, or I'm sorry, that is why I have always decided to be a provider for insurance, is because so it makes it more affordable for people. And my general session is $125 cash pay. That's a lot for a lot of people.
Sure,
and
yeah, it is.
so that's why I've always, and of course when you're dealing with insurance, you're not getting that, and you're not, and you're waiting several weeks to get a payout, and the turnaround and the paperwork is all a hassle. But I really believe in making mental health care accessible for as many people as possible, and that's why we do sliding scale. We have in the center, we have people that are kind of all different, they may be an intern, or they may be a provisionally licensed, and that way we can offer price points for everyone that say, okay, well, you may not be able to, what can you afford? You can afford $40. Okay, here's somebody here.
So can that be dangerous from the standpoint of, does less money mean less qualified? And is it better to be, I get to talk to somebody, then even if they're not as qualified, then I have to pay more to talk to somebody who has the background, training, life experience.
Sure. I think the one thing about the counseling and social work in general is that everyone is always being supervised. Always. I consult with somebody on my cases that I'm not officially being supervised, but I have a group of people that I meet with on a regular basis, and I'm like, this case is really, really stumping me. What do I do with this? Do you have any suggestions? And we'll talk about cases, and I see that in the medical industry, but I don't see that across the board but counseling and social work, for the most part, I think are always, so the people that are less, quote unquote, less qualified are seeking supervision and talking with those, and talking with somebody that's much more qualified, and learning from other people that are qualified. That's the only way you learn, and a lot of the times, I will say this, is that you can't teach empathy. So there are people that get into the counseling arena or social work arena, and they have all the interventions, and they are a walking book, but they can't sit with people. Mm-hmm. And so that's when you put them in management or something. I don't know, but
bedside manner etiquette.
But I just and I think that a lot of times people look at that industry as people that are in the industry. There's a lot of narcissism in the industry, so you have to be careful of that too. So
where does that come from?
We have to get a lot of education. We have, and I think that
is there as a therapist, does one become narcissistic, or because they think they help all these people, or is it because they were already, and this is just bringing them
It's down? Probably like the chicken or the egg. It's probably hard to like kind of differentiate, but I do think that it's a lot of people. There's a lot of control. There's a lot of, I walk with a manner that's really, really humble, but I've seen other counselors that are like, man, you got to get your stuff together, and say that to clients. So yeah. I just think that you just have to be careful. There's a lot of people out there that don't have the best intentions.
So my wife and I know you good enough to know you're an open book.
Yeah.
And what's been the toughest part of your journey from, where you would say, man, this is where things really got tough, and it might be before you got married. I don't know, but what's been the toughest part of your journey?
My goodness, I think you'll be able to relate to this, but it's one thing for you to go through difficult things and feel like you have the grit to get through it. But when you see your children going through hard things, that has been the most difficult part. I think that has been, whether it be estrangement from their dad or just some really difficult times that they've gone through. I can deal with my own stuff, but when you see your own children going through stuff, that's been the most difficult part by far.
So when there's a realization that, oh man, my son or daughters, in my case,
Yeah.
are going through something, and you become aware of it, what would you say to a client that first time, like, where do you go? Where's the jumping off point of, oh man, this is really hard because it's not me. I would take that cross all day. I'd take that burden all day long. So how do you start out in a point with managing what is something that's probably going to be, really tough to compartmentalize or say, okay, it's not happening to me. You get the question.
Yeah. So I think it's about developing a culture of acceptance and also just being a listener, especially with teenagers, just being a listener and observer. I have told my kids since they started therapy, they started therapy when I started going through when I separated. And they all had their own counselors. And I think it's important. Like, I also am a musician, and I tried to teach my daughter Zoe piano lessons when she was 5. And then she was playing the piano, and then she said, Mom, you have it all wrong. You're not doing it right. And I had a college education in music. So that's when I knew it was time to get her a piano teacher, right? And I think that's the same for counseling too. Like, just because I'm a therapist I spend a fortune on therapy for myself and for my kids because that's a priority. And I've joked around with people in session and also with my own kids that, you know what, you can get loans for school, you can't get loans for therapy. And so I feel like I'm, you have therapy funds. You may not have college funds, but you have therapy funds. And I think we kind of joke around tongue in cheek about that. But I think it's important for them to have that self-awareness and for them to, this is just setting them in that trajectory of the coping skills that they'll need in life. But I think that my kids, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a therapist, like, I think we'll all be in lifelong therapy, like me and my children.
We use the word therapy, and therapy probably comes with a negative connotation. And
I hate that.
Which is unfortunate, and we are probably, as a society, especially, as a man, we tend to hold things in, and we host a men's golf retreat, and it sounds funny because it's a great way to get men to show up when there's golf involved.
Yeah.
And we do small group sessions and large group sessions, and after a while, people realize the golf is fun, but it's not what they say. That was the best part of those 3 days. And therapy isn't just, I'm a mess and I need help, although the ones who can't admit they're a mess and need help are probably the most messed up. But it's about, let's be, a chance to be real, have real conversation, and not internalize everything. And, maybe it's, how do we move from the stigma of therapy to...
I think that we're just on a good trajectory because I have kids that come into my office. When I say kids, I'm talking about teenagers, that we do walk therapy. We don't sit in a chair, because honestly, I don't know about you, but my kids talk the most when I'm driving in the car. Like, that's when I'm not making eye contact with them, and they can like kind of look at other things, and that's when things come up, is when they're just like kind of looking at the scenery and, hey Mom, this happened today. And so I've recognized that in teens. And so there's a lot that I'm really lucky to have an office that's private, and we can take walks on private streets it's really beautiful. It's an old historic part of St. Charles. So it's really, that part is, I feel really lucky. But we're trying to debunk those like traditional Freudian, you lay on the couch and I sit here with a clipboard. Like, that's not really what therapy is anymore. We're trying, like, it's my prefrontal cortex meeting with your prefrontal cortex, and we're gonna like hash out like some stuff. And a lot of times that's not, there's so many other techniques that are coming out where, maybe, I've seen where people are incorporating yoga into their practices and using some somatic body experiences, like, doing a body scan before you sit down as to like, okay, where are you feeling tension in your body? Let's talk about that. Where do you think that comes from? Like that it's not just like, okay, sit down, tell me all your trauma. Like it doesn't work that way. So I think that therapy has gotten a bad rap because people think that it's like where you go when, we have show or movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and people think that like, oh, I had to go to therapy so I don't go to the quote unquote loony bin, which we are starting to change very slowly those things about mental health and what we think and those stigmas. And so it's a process. We're working on it.
And it needs to change for us as a society to get healthier, so that it's not, things like eating disorders and things like suicidal ideation. There's not some shame involved, right, or transgender issues or whatever.
Right.
There shouldn't be shame attached to it. It should, right, be one condition, one situation isn't worse, quote unquote, right, worse than another. It just is, and we all go through different things in life. Our journeys are different. As I get older, I realize, just because something didn't go the way I wanted it to, doesn't mean it didn't go the way it needed to. Sure. And you develop character, you become who you are, you grow into your role, mm-hmm, whether it's your professional sphere of influence, as a parent, as a friend, mm-hmm, as whatever vocation you're in. And it's developed from the challenges that you go through. And so we have, sure, to, I know that I can pray and pray. Sometimes when I'm at my best, I walk and I pray. I walk my block and I pray. And I can go through periods where like, I feel like I'm praying and you don't feel like you're seeing any movement. Mm-mm. And sometimes it's months and years later where you go, there was stuff at work. And mm-hmm, and this isn't how I would have drawn it up, but we wouldn't be here if it hadn't have gone the way it did. That I didn't necessarily like it at the time. Does that?
Yeah, totally. I also look at prayer, meditation, mindfulness, all of that as pain management. Like I look at it as like sometimes we're not praying to have something answered, but we're praying to calm our souls, mm-hmm, to calm the anxiety that's within. And that's something that's really, and so we think, our prayers didn't get answered, but I know that prayer helped me through Aiden. Like that helped me in the night when I was like not feeling him kick and they were telling me like maybe he's dead. And that prayer would help me, that would calm me, that would make me feel more centered. So it's never not a good thing, Right.
Well, David in the Psalms, so much of it is just crying out without answers and just deliver me, please. And, it isn't necessarily, although some of Psalms is praising God for what he did and what he brought David through. But other times it was just the genuine crying out, like, this is more than I can handle. Yeah. And somehow get me through it. And the pain management is something that I think is worth conveying and hoping that the message comes through that we all have to get to a place that is healthier. Mm-hmm. And if we ignore or we compartmentalize or we don't deal with that pain, then
it'll come up.
It just manifests, right?
I do think we're making progress because maybe not so much in our generation, but in the younger generation, I am seeing a trend of when I go through like my informed consent, which I talk about confidentiality and the limits of confidentiality. And I will say, because we live in a relatively small community, I'll say, look, if I see you at Target, like I'm not going to come up to you. Like if you want to come up to me, that's fine. But I'm never, because then if I come up to you with your friends and then you're like, oh, that's my therapist, like maybe you don't want people to know that you have a therapist. And all of people that like the younger generation is like, oh, everybody has a therapist. Like it's fine. Like it's fine. Like I don't care. You can come up to me anytime, And so I said, well, I won't. But just to make, so I think that we're getting to a place where we're we're letting go of the stigmatization of it, working to a place of better mental health, which is going to increase our, better physical health too.
Pendulum swing.
Yeah.
And it's probably swinging now in a way that
our
children are aware of, you know what, this isn't a bad thing. And, my parents are a mess, so I need to talk to somebody. All right,
yeah.
One day your children are going to say that about you
everybody
too.
needs a person.
Yeah.
Everybody needs a person that doesn't really know you. I mean, you know my background, you know what we know each other. And so I'm not gonna tell you everything because I'm afraid you might judge that, even though you're one of the least judgmental people I know. But a therapist, I can leave it all there and go about my day. There's something really, and then hopefully she's gonna give me some tangible skills to walk away with it. Oh yeah, and she has through the years. So that's everybody needs a person,
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the way you're helping make the pendulum swing and
Thank you.
and moving the needle. And you've got some blog sites, websites. You want to share those?
Yes. So I write a couple blogs. It's monthly, and it's hopeandhealingcounseling.com. You can go to the website and get that information there. Along with that's where the Center for Hope and Healing
they'll find
is,
your blog site, your blogs on that site.
Blogs on the site.
Hope and Healing Counseling.com.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Thank
I would
you.
encourage everybody to go there. And it's been a great time sitting down with you and having the conversation. And I appreciate you sharing some of the hard things that you shared and just being real with us. And I'm really hopeful that the stigma continues to diminish, and those people that have been ignoring the need to get some help and reach out for help are emboldened to do so, just hopefully from this conversation.
I hope so too. Thanks so much for having me, Corey.
Appreciate it, Kristen. Thank you. The conversation around mental health is one that we need to have more often, I think, and it's one that I feel personally like we need to start to address and attack more. And the conversation with Kristen was valuable in, I think, a whole lot of ways, and I feel like it's a great jumping off point for something that we're going to spend more and more time on. There are so many challenges in life, and we all walk through a lot of stuff, a lot of crap sometimes, and of course there are great and high moments in life too, and we realize, I think, when we appreciate the high moments and the great moments where we're on the mountaintop more, when we go through stuff and we realize how hard it is to get to certain places and to realize a victory in our lives, and that doesn't diminish the fact that mental health is a real issue that needs to be addressed. So this is a jumping off point. We're going to attack it more, and I'm glad for so many reasons that we spent the time with Kristen today, and hopefully you were able to glean something of value from it, and we'll look forward to being with you again next time on Running Eyes.